Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Create Your Best Chapter. This is a podcast where I chat with women who share their experiences around divorce, around job loss, around major life changes, and they share their wisdom, their guidance, and their advice to all of you so that we can all support each other and encourage each other through our challenging times. So, I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm really happy to introduce my guest today. Her name is Alana Cohen, and we're going to get to know a little bit about her journey and how she is now helping people who are navigating high conflict divorces. So, Alana, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Can you just introduce yourself to the audience and just let everyone know a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I am a lawyer by training, but on the corporate side usually, and I went through a pretty horrifying divorce that gave me kind of a PhD in the law in a couple of provinces in both sort of family law and also high conflict people. And so following that, I really went on a mission to help people through their divorces so no one would have to go through what I went through. And so that's what I do these days. I help, there are a bunch of different divorce coaches, but I help people understand what they're going through, including sometimes people don't realize they've been abused. I help them strategize on either how to escape or how to work through a divorce that, well, with a high conflict person is almost always stalled, how to actually achieve results, how to communicate with lawyers, judges, police, sometimes professionals, to make sure that the abuser isn't able to turn the tables and make the bad guy look like the good guy and the good guy look like the bad guy, because that's a very favorite tactic of theirs. So that, if you can be identified as the victim, you can get the help that you need.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible work that you do, incredible support that you offer to people. Can you maybe delve into a little bit about abuse? Because I know that you just wrote an article recently, and we'll link that in the show notes so people can read that article. But you define different types of abuse, which I found really interesting because I think a lot of times we think of abuse, we think of physical abuse. We're even starting to talk a lot more about emotional abuse. Can you explain a little bit about how abuse can show up in not just physical or emotional abuse? Like, what other
Yeah,
definitions of abuse are there?
absolutely. So I think we're all really familiar. It's really easy to spot physical abuse. Even emotional abuse, I think most people perceive emotional abuse as a lot of criticism, insults, name calling, but it's actually so much more insidious than that usually. Without wanting to diminish physical abuse at all, to my mind, the most harmful thing about any kind of abuse is the fact that someone who is supposed to love you the most in this world is willing to hurt you. And they really do it willingly. And so it shows up in a lot of ways. So emotional abuse can be, manipulation, really. This list that I have put together, I put together during my divorce, and it was trying to understand what I was going through and why it was bad. And I started to look up different forms of manipulation. And after a bunch of Googling, I came up with this list of, it was over 200 different manipulation tactics.
Wow.
A lot of them we don't think of as being bad because, well, most sales happen using manipulation, right? Someone will say, "Oh, let me give you a little taste of something so that you now want to buy the product." Or, "Why don't you try our service for free? And then, by the way, if you don't cancel, we're going to start charging your credit card." But manipulation in relationships happens the same way. I was on a session for entrepreneurs about advertising last week, and they talked about how people's fear of loss is greater than their desire for gain, and so they'll use FOMO effectively to manipulate people into buying, and false sense of urgency to create, make people buy now, and giving you small deals to make you think you've gotten a deal so that you'll buy. But these are all forms of manipulation. And when they're used on someone every single day over and over and over again in these different forms, they have the effect of making you not know what's real, not knowing what's true, doubt your own beliefs, think bad things about yourself, lower your self esteem. and generally be confused. And that confusion starts to make you sort of depressed and sad and less motivated in life, and maybe less able to concentrate, less able to be a good parent, less able to be patient, less happy. They really do have long-term effects. And so I would say, the common non-physical forms of abuse would be emotional and psychological, which I kind of grouped together, financial abuse, and legal abuse. And so emotional abuse, yes, could be all those insults. It could also commonly be something called gaslighting. Gaslighting is where, I know something is true, but I'm going to tell you absolutely no, it's not. The sky is green. No, what are you talking about? The sky is green. You're so crazy. Why do you think the sky is green? That sort of crazy talk, that's another one that's very common. A super common one is called a DARVO tactic. And so DARVO stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. And so if you imagine Donald Trump as the classic example, and we'll say, you grabbed that woman by the bleep bleep. And he'll say, no, absolutely, I didn't. Deny. And oh my God, you're always out to get me. These Democrats are always trying to persecute me. Now, not only have I attacked you, but I've claimed that I'm the victim of your attack, right? And as a result, now you think I'm the victim instead of being the abuser. But actually, if we go back to the beginning of the story, he did something bad. And he did something that he should be apologizing and taking accountability for. But fights in toxic relationships often go that way. Instead of the bad person, the bad actor, apologizing and taking accountability, they deny, they attack the other person, and somehow the script gets flipped around. And even though you walked into that conversation being mad at the other person instead of getting an apology and closure, somehow they're now mad at you. And it's sort of always that way. They won't apologize, they don't take accountability, and you leave feeling like everything is always your fault. And I would say that's one of the most common features of emotional and psychological abuse, is when you start to feel like you can't do anything right, everything is your fault, you're a bad person, and you start to feel like you need to walk on eggshells around the other person because it would be your fault if they got upset, and it would be your fault if they did something bad to you, and it would be your fault if things didn't go right, and it would be your fault if the kids are, if they're beating you up, it's still your fault, right? Is that sort of pervasive sense of it's your fault. In terms of financial abuse, it can look a lot of ways. And I would say where you have two financially unequal partners, maybe a working partner and a stay-at-home partner, it looks like the stay-at-home partner being trapped and under the control of the other person. And so denied funds, right? Denied funds for groceries, denied funds for clothes, denied funds for the things that they want to do and pursue, denied funds for education. But the result of that is also no funds to be able to leave if they so choose, because they wouldn't be able to make it on their own. And that's sort of a more extreme form. Or an even more extreme form can be someone I spoke to yesterday to the point of fraud, which I would say I also incidentally went through in my journey, where you're with a partner and, maybe you make the same, but the other person says, oh, well, we're going to move in together. You should sell your stuff and, put in to buy this thing together. But, in my case, I sold a condo in one city to help us move and bought the house in the other. But then even though he had promised to contribute, he hadn't. So that's another one called, I want to call it breadcrumbing. It's a little bit breadcrumbing, where they say, oh, if you do this, then I will also do, and then you do your part, and they don't do their part. And it can be a way to commit financial fraud. So I ended up contributing all of my financial assets and savings into the relationship, into the marriage. And he did not. He kept them separate and apart, which meant that when we got divorced, his were excluded assets. They're called things that don't need to get divided. But all of my stuff, because it had been commingled into the marital sort of pot, got divided. So he kept all of his stuff and took half of mine. And that can get very extreme. I spoke to someone yesterday who had effectively been defrauded that way out of millions. Entire life savings times a few. So that could be financial abuse. But a very subtle form of financial abuse is just the constant criticism. I would say in my case, even though I made a lot more than my partner, I used to get criticized all the time for how I spent money. I was responsible for paying the bills. I was responsible for the saving. I was making more money, but I would be criticized, for example, for buying a coffee at work every morning. and how I was so reckless with money, and how I just was so bad with money and I shouldn't be in charge of anything. But actually, if you'd asked him, he had no idea how much money we made, how much money we had, how much money we needed, what to retire on. He would have had no clue. And meanwhile, it was actually him who was being reckless. For example, there were points which he lost his job. He had trouble holding down a job, and we had some bicycles stolen from the house, and he said, "Oh well, we need to replace them." Of course, with very fancy, we're talking like $5,000-6,000 bicycles. And I had said, "But like, you're not working right now, so no, we're not buying those bicycles right now. Let's wait till you get a job." And then he went out and bought them anyways. Showed up, bought me one cheaper than his, and said, "Oh, it's your birthday present. Look, I got you this fancy birthday present. Why aren't you more grateful for me having gotten you such a nice gift? And by the way, I bought myself one twice as expensive as yours, all using your money after you told me we weren't going to do this expense." So the criticism can be the spending the other person's money, can be, those can also be financial abuse.
Yeah.
And legal abuse can look a few different ways as well. A lot of different ways. It happens commonly where you have immigrant couples, and a very abusive, controlling partner might hang on to the other person's passport. They might threaten to say, if you don't behave this way, I'm going to charge you with a crime or something, and I'm going to have you deported. I'm going to send you back to the home country. I'm going to leave you here, and you won't, especially if a husband gets sponsored for a job and he leaves his partner who's come here for him, then she'll lose her immigration status and she'll have to move. So that can be a very, very serious one. Do know that we have protections for that in this country. If you're in that situation, there is help and you will not be kicked out of the country. Call and ask for help. It can look, as it more commonly does in a divorce, like using the adversarial nature of the legal system against a partner. So I like to say in divorces, it takes two people to keep it amicable, and it takes one person to make it an all-out war. And we have an adversarial system. So if you want to sue somebody, you can always sue somebody, and they have to defend it, and it's very expensive. And when they lie to the legal system or they don't cooperate with what they're supposed to do, for example, you're supposed to make disclosure when you get divorced, financial disclosure to determine child support, they just won't. And the legal system is really bad at punishing them for it, really bad. So they play the game where they're constantly attacking you, assaulting you with legal charges, lying about you in court, going and getting court orders taken out against you, or suing you for things, or just attacking over and over again. And you're drawn into a legal battle. And if you don't defend yourself, well, in our legal system, if you don't defend yourself, a decision will be made against you. You're left with no choice but to defend yourself, which now means hiring a lawyer, spending thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands on a lawyer to defend yourself. And it's just simply being obstinate when you're going through a separation or divorce and there are children or assets involved. You got to divide them. It requires legal agreements. These people, high conflict people, they don't want a resolution. They keep you embroiled in the battle because they want attention, chaos, conflict. It gives them stimulus. It feeds them with fuel. And so it can be very, very difficult to get resolutions. And having that conflict, of course, over your partner's head keeps them incredibly stressed out all the time. And keeping those massive stress levels on someone is a form of abuse. Using the legal system in that way is a form of abuse. My ex, for example, went to an ex parte hearing. He went to night court without me being present, and claimed that I was abusive and crazy. And the court gave him a restraining order against me that stopped me from being in my own home, stopped me from seeing my children for the better part of a month, all with ill intentions, so that he could get control of the house and the children, because he knew that it would be really, really hard and expensive for me to fight to get those back. And he thought that would help him win everything in the divorce. So those are common non-physical forms of abuse. They are very serious. They have very serious long-term implications. And they really are a result of all forms of manipulation. And they involve the forms of manipulation. I'm on a bit of a campaign to try and educate people about forms of manipulation so that we can eliminate them, because I think we are much too susceptible to them as a society. Even in our selection of leaders, we tend to choose narcissists and sociopaths. I don't know if you know that fun fact, but like a lot of CEOs are narcissists, sociopaths, or psychopaths. And it's because we see them as like calm and decisive and charming, but these same qualities are actually very toxic often, or the result of someone very unhealthy underneath.
Yeah, wow. I mean, there's so many questions that result from that. And thank you for sharing that. And those sound just so devastating, all of these forms of abuse, and even what you went through, obviously. As you were talking, though, one of the things that kept coming up for me was when you're in a relationship and this starts happening, and it probably starts happening. I know for me, it started happening like really slowly, so that by the time you kind of like clue into what's happening and where you're at, it's almost like, I don't want to say too late, but you almost feel like it's too late.
Mm.
And you start questioning, like, how did I even get myself here? And so, and my situation was not nearly as terrible or devastating as some that you know that is your journey or other people's journey, but it's still that feeling of almost shame. I would say shame and embarrassment and guilt. And how do you even open up to someone that this is happening? Because it's like, we're smart women, right? Like I always said, I'm a smart, educated woman, right? I have a job, I'm financially secure, like I can pay for my own stuff, you know, I know what I'm doing. I'm not even young, right? I was like in my 30s. And so it's like this, the thought that kept coming up in my head was, I should know better. Like I should have known better. How did I let this happen? I should have let this stop. I should have had this stop sooner. And so how did you get out of those feelings? Like how did you face that and ask for help? Because I would imagine it's a very lonely experience, because people probably looked at you and went, wow, it's a great couple, right? They have everything. They have all the fancy bikes, right? And the fancy house. And they both have really great jobs. And she's a lawyer, and like all these things that we attribute to being quote unquote successful. So can you share a little bit about how you came out of that and how you also coach people on getting through that?
Well, there is a lot in that question
I
that I
know.
could dive into. Uh, I mean, if we start with reframing, let's remember that the entire US population, hundreds of millions of people, are likely about to vote Donald Trump back into power. And so falling for it and being ashamed is really, we got to give ourselves some grace on that
Mhm.
one. These people are truly manipulative, and they're really good at it. They are really good at being manipulative. They have grown up that way. They have learned that it's effective, and they have become better and better and better at it. I recently actually had suggested to me a book called The 48 Laws of Power. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. And it's really like, I don't know, the megalomaniac narcissist's guide to world domination. Like, what are
Mhm.
all the tactics? Don't do any work you can have someone do for you, and never, let anyone know where you're coming from, and don't pick a side of a fence. These people are skilled manipulators.
Mhm.
And I would interestingly also raise that I think precisely what you're saying, this shame, is exactly why there is so little support for men who endure
Mhm.
this kind of abuse, because
Mhm.
men do endure this abuse. I can't tell you if it's just as much as women, but they do endure this in manipulative form of abuse, and they have so much trouble admitting victimhood, because being a victim of someone having fooled you, quote unquote, is so
Mhm.
incompatible with their notions of masculinity. And I think, as intelligent, educated, mature women, we're facing the same thing. I thought I was I went to a great law school. How the hell did I get fooled by this? And so, what's the answer? One is that they're really manipulative on their end, and we should never take the blame for someone acting badly and targeting us.
Mhm.
Two is that it works like an addiction.
Mhm.
So when these relationships start, they very rarely start off with someone being, a d bag, like a really bad guy. They start off, or gal. They start off with someone being really sweet, amazing. They like all the same things as you. They say all the right things. They are so into you. They want to spend so much time together. They want to move the relationship forward so quickly. They want to be connected, attached, committed really fast. There are gifts. There is traveling together too soon. There are I love yous that happen too soon. There are all these wonderful dopamine hits
Mm-hmm.
that make you feel so great and so connected and so secure in that other person's feelings for you and so special, and all these really inherent psychological needs that we have to feel loved, connected, safe, secure, special, significant. They fulfill all of these emotional needs for us,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially because they often prey on people who they can see have some attachment issues or have some insecurities or have some, everyone does, of course, everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are a bit more susceptible than others because we could get into attachment theory, but I feel like that's maybe delving a little down the rabbit
Next time, Elena.
hole. Next time. So people who have a stronger need for that attachment because of the way that they were raised or their childhood bonds, and they know that if they start off really strong like that, they get you kind of hooked. And then slowly they inject a little bit of bad, a little bit of hurt, a backhanded compliment, a demand, a control, a breach of a boundary. And these happen very, very slowly, and they start off really, really small because it kind of becomes your new normal.
Mm-hmm.
You tolerated this, but now you're so committed that you're not going to let it go over that little thing. And things were so great before, so they'll get better. And then they slowly get worse, but you keep thinking, yeah, but man, things were so great in the beginning. And then every now and again, they give you a hit of that really nice guy or gal that they were in the beginning. And what this does is it creates something called trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is literally a chemical dependency caused by the intermittent reinforcement, that push and pull, I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you thing, causes a good feeling and then a bad feeling and a good feeling and a bad feeling. And you start to associate them together. The good feelings are always accompanied by bad feelings, and you start to associate love with pain in your head. And by the way, you're craving love, but because they do it so frequently, you now actually crave love and pain. And love without pain doesn't feel as intense an emotion as love with pain. So you're actually start to crave love with pain. And so over time, it becomes your norm, and you become so used to these spikes of, there's a bunch of like neurotransmitters and endorphins and whatever that go through you every time you get these hits, that you are chemically addicted to this person.
Mm-hmm.
And, we ask why victims don't leave. But in part it's this, because when you leave, you really, or even if you try to stop talking to them, you try to break up with them, you say, I'm never going to speak to this person, I'm blocking them. You really have this strong, like, oh, I need contact with that person. I feel, and it's withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
You're literally detoxing from all of these neurochemical and endorphin hits that you were getting from that pain and love together over and over again. And a fun fact, but I'll throw it in, is that actually they use the very same principles in torture, like military torture. You find it's not just the beat you up stuff, but they'll send it's the whole good cop, bad cop principle. They'll send in a good guy. He's really nice to you. He gives you some water. He acts really sweet. He asks you for something in a nice way. Then he might try to convince you, oh, well, if you don't tell me, triangulation. So like your family is in danger if you don't tell me, or, nobody cares about you, so you may as well tell us anyways. They try to manipulate you. When all those don't work, then they resort to pain tactics, right? Like active hurting you tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And then they repeat that cycle over and over and over again. Then they're nice to you. And you're just so grateful for the nice that you're willing to do anything to keep the nice.
Mm.
And thus control and coercion are born, because now you'll just be nice all the time. You'll do whatever it takes to keep them staying nice and paying attention to you. Sorry, I'm being very gesticulate for a podcast here. So that's why it happens. It's why it's so hard to leave. It's why we fall for it, because they know that they have to get you addicted first before they start hurting you. And I think we need to give ourselves some grace. This is really someone who is using intentional, highly effective tactics based on human psychology and neurobiology, whether they're aware of it or not, to get us addicted to them in order to be able to keep hurting us. And so we have to forgive ourselves for that. And we just have to learn to, one, go through detox, go to rehab, and two, learn healthy boundaries so that we never allow someone to cross those boundaries again, because it was the crossing of the boundaries that allowed that to go too far.
That's so interesting, Ilana. Thank you so much for explaining that. because I always feel that when you know something, that arms you. Like that makes you feel so more empowered. So I think a few things there. I mean, one, what you do, what other people are doing in this space in terms of getting the word out, in terms of letting people know that there's support for them is critical, right? Look, there's support, there's resources, you're not crazy, you're able to get out of this. We've done it. Other people are, look at other people that have done it. Like there's someone here that can walk alongside with you to help you through this. So I think getting the word out is so, so, so important. And I think the second thing is that educational piece, right? Like knowing, okay, I know this is almost a physiological thing that's happening to me, right? Like it's not just in my head. I'm having these like physiological, like you said, addictive kind of symptoms happening. And I know that there's a way to reclaim my own self. So I think that those two things, that knowing that there's support and then knowing that there's a reason behind it, and then having the resources after as well. So once you leave the relationship, and I know with you, you help people through the really tough things in terms of going to court or talking to police or talking to lawyers. And then after that too, okay, how do you reclaim your life now? Right? How do you learn to reset those boundaries? How do you learn to listen to yourself? How do you learn to trust yourself? How do you learn to have healthy relationships? So it's that whole continuum of support and services that people really need.
And I would even add in there, our system, because so few people really understand emotional, psychological, financial, legal abuse, when people leave and go seek help, they often get systematically re-traumatized by the system and the people out there. All the well-meaning lawyers and therapists in the world, if they aren't educated about this stuff, won't recognize the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
I can say personally, I went through 5 lawyers before I found someone who actually understood, because the first few were like, oh, the two of you fight a lot, but that's just because, you're freshly getting divorced. And of course you're angry with each other. But he was accusing me of being crazy and I was accusing him of being abusive. And this was some normal thing that they hear all the time. And they're so desensitized to it that in their mind, it was he said, she said, and we were all bad, right? We were just both bad. And it took a while before I could articulate in a lot of research, all of this research, to educate myself before I could articulate, no, these are the toxic patterns of behavior that he is displaying. These are the, things he is doing in bad faith. These are the manipulative tactics. These are the, it's not me. I am the victim. I am not just as bad. This is not just conflict between two people. This is someone being abusive. And it's actually, I think so many people, like you and I, because we're educated, we don't think I'm not a victim, so therefore I wasn't abused. And they just go out there and it becomes this he said, she said, and he's a jerk and he was selfish, or she was a manipulative, gold digging, whatever. But they don't actually learn to articulate, the harm. And so because they don't say certain magic words to the lawyers and the police and the judges, they don't identify that one person is a victim and one. I can't count the number of times police walked into the house and because he was calm and I was really angry, therefore I was crazy and he was a victim. But actually he had done horrible things and I was justifiably angry at the horrible abusive things he had done. And he was calm because he was smug about having gotten away with it. And police are not well trained to identify these things. And even courts and judges, we tend to think judges should be able to spot lies better than other people, but they statistically can't. Actually, judges are just as susceptible as falling for lies as everybody else is, and lawyers too. And lawyers are required by the legal code of ethics to try to reach an amicable resolution out of court. And so they will push you to mediate, send a bunch of letters, try to disarm everybody, de-escalate, get everything calmed down, thinking that if you just appease and you just compromise enough, well, you'll get this done and it'll all be over and everybody's going to finally calm down and be reasonable. But what they don't understand is that systematically, These people don't compromise and they don't give in, and their requirements and their demands are unreasonable and unfair. And so what ends up happening is that, they will just, well, you victim, you seem to be the more conciliatory person here. So if you just compromise enough, then we're going to come to a deal and this divorce will be over and everybody will move on and be happy. But what that deal would look like would be the abuser gets everything and the victim gets nothing, and the victim walks away even more injured. So they get systematically re-abused, systematically re-traumatized by the very system itself, because it assumes people have empathy. It assumes people want conflicts to be resolved. It assumes that all people are reasonable and can be convinced to be fair. And it's just not true. And so there needs to be much more awareness around, sometimes resolving things out of court is actually not the best way, because, you see a Donald Trump, the only time he's ever going to, and he still won't concede that he's wrong, is when when a judge issues, a judgment against him that he's going to owe $85 million. And even then he'll walk out of court and he'll still be bad mouthing the victim, being like, oh, everyone's just out to get me, and I haven't done anything wrong. And so you never get closure, and you never really get a good result. You never get a good result. You never get validated. And if it were just up to her trying to resolve that personally with him out of court, it just never would have happened. She could have been till the cows come home and pigs fly. So relying on the system, there are supports, but you really do need someone who can help you find the right supports. Right. You do need to make sure that when you speak to people, you're only working with someone who they should believe you, and they should be able to identify that the things you're saying constitute abuse or toxic behaviors. And they should be able to say, yes, I understand that we're not just going to go sit at a table and be nice and everyone's going to play nice. You need to find people who understand the tactics that work with these people, and that's something that I help people with, and understanding that system doesn't work for everybody. That like make it work together, and if you end up working with someone who doesn't understand these things, you'll just be further traumatized. So it's really important to choose the right professionals to work with who are trauma informed and educated. For myself, I ended up choosing a lawyer who actually had a previous career in social work. Wow. It almost takes something like that.
Right. Well, I'm so glad that this is the work that you're doing, even though it took you, you needed to get through a really tough time and a really dark time in your own life to be able to support people that are going through this. But I believe this is what we need more of, because I even feel like that word abuse is sometimes hard to say, right? We don't want to talk about it. No. Like, let's just all, like you said, let's just all talk about it and just like, sure. I think ultimately that'd be awesome if we could all just mediate and just have a calm, civil discussion. But if we're talking about someone who is an abuser, is an abusive person, is a manipulative person, is a narcissist, doesn't have any of those emotional kind of regulations like healthy people do, then, we need to acknowledge that. But I think it's such a hard thing to say. It's a hard thing to say I was abused. It's a hard thing to talk about abuse. And so I think the more that we talk about it, and this is part of my mission too, is let's just have the conversation so that people know. And then it becomes we get a little bit more attuned to that word. We understand the ins and outs. We educate ourselves. I almost feel like we need to be educating people way before they get married, right? Like almost as a society, like how do we spot these types of people? How do we protect ourselves? How do we stay true to our own values and our own inner wisdom, right? So I think there's just so many layers of this. But like I said, I think the first step is always just awareness, talking about it, discussing it, having people like you that can educate us on it so that we can, add all of this knowledge to our own toolkit, like for me as well, right? So that we can support people better.
Ideally, we become so aware of these things that we teach children healthy self-regulation and interpersonal skills at an early age,
right?
Which would eliminate a lot of these toxic personalities, right? I think I have a lot of theories on intergenerational trauma, and we're only a couple generations out of a couple of world wars, right? Yeah, and those things have an impact on people. Men who came back from war traumatized and shut down their emotions were raising boys, and those boys learned that they shouldn't have emotions, that it was unmanly or something to not have emotions. And
Mm-hmm.
that resulted in a lot of divorces and unhappy marriages. Women became more independent.
Mm-hmm.
Men, became less likely to be committed and want to be in long-term relationships. The traditional marriage exploded on everybody, and the generations of children are still working through all of that trauma and what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to realize that if we were at a young age taught to process our emotions and identify our emotions and self-regulate and have healthy interpersonal skills, we would probably have a lot less abuse on our hands. But we can't fix that until we realize how pervasive it is.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you that awareness is a huge piece, and hence the segue to the business that I have started, which is sort of twofold. I do the coaching on the one hand, individual and group, but also the goal of the website I've created called Prepare Hub is to bring together all the professionals and reliable information in this space, because there's a lot of unreliable information in this space, so
Mm-hmm.
that people can find trauma informed lawyers and therapists and mediators and professionals and parenting coordinators and all those other things who will get it, quote unquote, get it. And then as they educate people, we'll educate more professionals. You educate more professionals leads to greater dissemination of that information, I think, in society, and then we can start to really, really address it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. So I will link that your website in the show notes so that people can come check it out, because it is full of amazing resources and full of ways that people can get support. So thank you, Elena, so much. We could talk about this for hours, and we'll definitely do a part 2 where we talk about maybe intergenerational trauma. I think that's such a interesting topic, and we'll chat more about how we can support people. But I acknowledge you for all the hard work that you do, for the journey that you've been on, and that you're willing and so open to share and to support people as they go through their dark times. We really need that. We need people like you. People that you help need you. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I've learned so much. I'm probably going to have to listen to it again just to take some notes, which I will do. But we will definitely chat again. And I thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm also sorry for what you've had to go through, and very grateful that you're doing this work as well, and that we're all helping bring this awareness to everyone.
Yeah, thank you.